Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to examine some interesting new Star Trek news, and we're also I kind of want to discuss, maybe where they should move from this point forward instead of the direction that they appear to be going. And well, the news we have today is that Robert Sallin, who produced Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan back in 1982, has come forward and said that he has a totally original Star Trek idea that he's been trying to pitch to Paramount. And basically, they've talked to him on the phone about it. There's been conversations about it. But he's basically just waiting for them to ask him to come in. And apparently, this all hinges on Star Trek 4, which is supposed to be in production right now. Well, not in production, I shouldn't say, but it's being it's trying to be written because they're still having issues trying to get it off the ground. Originally, I believe the plot line was supposed to have Chris Pine's James Kirk and Chris Hemsworth's George Kirk somehow be intertwined in a story, so that I guess you could just capitalize on the fact that Chris Evans is famous now instead of when he was in the first Star Trek film back in 2009. So I don't really know what idea Sallin might be pitching, but the thing is like he doesn't have like a huge filmography or career or anything like that. He only executive produced Star Trek 2. That's the only film that he ever produced. And really the only reason was because Paramount wanted him to be able to cut the budget down. A lot of the reason why he was there was to be a financial guy. So the fact that he was brought, the fact that, they do give him a few little creative credits for some stuff that did go into the film, but I attribute most of that to Nicholas Meyer, who was the director. And Nicholas Meyer also came back for Star Trek 6. Now, if it was an idea coming straight from him, I think I would be a lot more optimistic about it. And I can't remember if he was, they announced that he was involved in something recently, but I can't remember exactly. But if it was him or somebody who was equally as creative in the Star Trek franchise, it may be Bill Shatner or somebody, coming in and trying to make some kind of a pitch. I think that would get me a little bit more excited than just hearing that Robert Sallin somehow has this a pitch that he thinks is wholly original. However, apparently, according to him, the whether Paramount will move forward with this pitch is very dependent on Noah Hawley's Star Trek 4, like I said, and basically that's gone nowhere because they've lost Chris Hemsworth. Well, Chris Hemsworth is pretty much tied up in Marvel, and he's doing like a million other films. So for him to find space in his schedule to do that would probably be pretty difficult to foresee, at least within the next 2 to 3 years. And then Chris Pine, again, is somebody else who he's getting a lot of work right now. He's going to be in Wonder Woman 1984 coming up later this year. And he's got probably a few other films that are in the pipeline right now as well. So he's somebody else who's in demand. So trying to match both of those guys' schedules up at this point is going to be kind of hectic. In addition to the fact that they're also going to have to pay them a lot more money to come back, because I believe that the contracts that they all signed were only for 3 films, which ended with Star Trek Beyond. So renegotiating those in some kind of a fiscally meaningful sense is going to take a lot of time and a lot of money with all of those actors, because you have a lot of high-profile actors. You have Carl Urban, who was just on The Boys last year, and who's currently, I think they're still filming season 2, or they just completed filming before the coronavirus thing. But Carl Urban's out doing that. Anton Yelnats is dead. Zoe Saldana, she's still doing a lot of stuff with Gamora and stuff in the MCU. Zachary Quinto, might be the only one that has kind of like what looks like a free schedule, although I'm not sure, what he's involved in. He does a lot of television stuff too, I think. And then, obviously you have Chris Pine, Simon Pegg, again, somebody with a very busy schedule that has stuff going on and who's tried to work with Paramount before on these scripts, and I think he's been feeling the studio push, so I don't even know if they could convince him to come back and be Scotty. There's a lot up in the air on that when you go into that kind of a realm. Where you have all of these actors that have these branching out careers. Because really, when they did the first Star Trek, a lot of those actors were kind of in a lull. Carl Urban, I don't think had done anything for a couple of years. It was before he had done Dread and stuff like that, and kind of had a bit of a resurgence. So I think that was, and also this was post Doom. So you had that Zoe Saldana, who was starting to get really popular. This was kind of one of the early films in her career that kind of when it exploded. This I remember she was in The Losers around the same time. Um, and then, of course, she started playing Gamora in 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy, which was another big jump. Zachary Quinto was probably the most famous one at the time because he was coming off of uh, Heroes, which was a very popular television series where he was the main villain, and a lot of people really enjoyed his character. So he was probably actually the biggest one going, and he's kind of the smallest one coming out, which is a bit ironic. Chris Pine, that pretty much jump-started his career. I mean, that was his big break, was playing Captain Kirk pretty much. And then he got jobs as like Steve Trevor, and he was in one of those Jack Ryan movies. He had a bunch of work after this. The only stuff that I really remember him from before this was like stuff like Smokin' Aces. That was kind of interesting. I remember him from that. And then, you can look down at some of the other ones. Like I said, Carl Urban was kind of on an in-between, but then Simon Pegg, I think he was just coming off of, it was either Hot Fuzz or At World's End, so they kind of caught him in between movies at first, and then I think the next one was after World's End came out. So, they're kind of catching him in between movies and stuff, and he's also really interested in the Marvel Comics side because of his relationship with Edgar Wright. They're very good friends. So, he was kind of in a lull, so you could get him. And in addition to that, he wasn't in the first half of the movie, so his filming time was probably shrunk down quite a bit for the scenes that he was in. Anton Yelchin, again, was a very young actor. He hadn't been in too much up until that point, enough to get noticed, basically. So it was a very different time for all of those actors. So, like I said, I don't think they're going to be able to carry on with a Star Trek 4 if that's the way they want to go. And I don't really think that is the way they should go at this point, because they have that stupid animated show that's coming out, Star Trek Lower Decks, I believe is what it's called. They turned it into like a Family Guy-esque comedy, like a sex comedy, I think. So, there's that, which... That should be like a parody in an actual Star Trek episode. That shouldn't be a thing on its own. It's like Itchy and Scratchy in The Simpsons. Like that show would, actually, it would probably be pretty entertaining, but I don't think it would ever last on television. It's basically the same thing as Happy Tree Friends, actually. But maybe a bad example. But the point is that that's not really what Star Trek should be. It shouldn't be a joke. It was never meant to be a joke. Although at some points it kind of inadvertently became a joke with some of the special effects and stuff. But that's kind of beyond itself. It was a '67 television show. So I don't have confidence in that. I don't have confidence in Sallin's pitch. I don't have confidence in anything they're doing right now. I don't even need to explain the horror show that was Star Trek Picard. I think everybody knows how big of a train wreck that crap was. And I am not subjecting myself to that horrible shit like I did with the Watchmen television series because I don't want to go insane. But moving forward with Star Trek, I think the only thing that you can do is just let it be for a while. Because they've milked it into the ground. Every television show they seem to launch with it just fails miserably. Every piece of property they seem to launch with it seems to make less and less money. They're just degrading the brand at this point, and I think they've lost the fan base because, to be frank, a lot of Star Trek's fan base is based in the 50 to 60-year-old range now, or at least the original series, because of how long ago it was. And a lot of people don't. There weren't a lot of fans. There was a very core group of fans, through the 80s and the 90s and stuff. That's why I think TNG and a lot of those other series were as successful as they were, is because that fan base was still there and they still wanted Star Trek. But I think as you get into the younger fan base now, it's Star Wars has taken over. It kind of already did, even though there was kind of a battle back and forth a little bit there in the early 80s. It won the crown. For films anyway, for the film franchises, it was the more successful franchise, and I think it's the more attractive franchise to a lot of people because of the fantasy elements and the cool looking laser swords and shit like that. I love Star Wars too, but I like Star Trek more. And I think if you're going to do good Star Trek, it can't be related to a childish crowd. It has to be set. You have to go back to the hardcore science fiction. You have to go back to the original series. You have to get good science fiction writers in there. You have to get people that know what they're doing. You have to get a good writer's room and have people going around. You have to make sure that your people know their shit and they come in knowing their shit. And I'm not talking about like Star Trek lore, whatever. I mean, just knowing about science fiction in general, knowing what works, knowing what doesn't, having original ideas to throw forward for ideas for episodes and things like that. Even Hobbit stuff. You could do what TNG did. You could just make a different type of TNG where now they've jumped even further into the future, and the uniforms are different, and the starships are different, but it's still the same Federation, and it's still interesting. You can make another big time jump like that, and you can possibly jumpstart a new series if you have the right people creatively behind the series or the film if they choose to go that route. But I don't think you can do anything right now. I think you have to wait about 5 or 6 years at minimum. And after that point, then start developing another film. And then hopefully you'll have another film out probably like 8 or 9 years after the last Star Trek related thing came out. And hopefully it's long enough where people have kind of, the rage has died down over the old stuff. They're willing to accept something new, because this is just, again, I make this comparison all the time. It's like pushing a calf into a meat grinder. That's literally what it is, because you're pushing something out that has a very low probability of succeeding because of the level of failure of the things that have come before it. So it just gets progressively worse and worse and worse, even if the product is not necessarily degrading. I think Star Trek Beyond is a good example of that. I think it was probably better than Into Darkness. Into Darkness is just like I hate that movie so goddamn much. But Beyond as a quality film is probably better than that, but it made less money because it's just a franchise that has now lost its way in a sense, or it's lost its ability to capture people and have them throw money. It's financially, it's hemorrhaging. And that's a problem. And the thing is that Star Trek has always kind of operated in this kind of niche area for the most part. That hardcore science fiction crowd. It doesn't really operate too much in like the general science fiction. Like if you have somebody that's just like, oh yeah, I like science fiction. I watch like something like I've watched 2001: A Space Odyssey or something. I like that, or that's probably a bad example because that is hardcore science fiction. But if you have somebody that kind of likes like low key science fiction stuff that's not too crazy or too hardcore, then they're not going to like Star Trek, because Star Trek is the epitome of like hardcore science fiction where you can actually apply physics things to it, and there's people that have actually tried to experiment with the idea of making shit like a phaser. Those are the dedicated type of people that you have that really made that series live for so long, and you have to kind of cater to that crowd. Not necessarily those exact same people, but that general crowd of people that want hardcore science fiction. People like me, people that love movies like Interstellar because of the science aspect of it that they find very interesting. Stuff like that. But bring these people in, and don't have writers come in and say like, oh, we want to throw fuck into Star Trek. Like, no, Star Trek does not need the word fuck. You don't need to keep saying that over and over again. This is not a Rob Zombie movie. It should be an ideal. The whole point is that it's supposed to be interesting science fiction stories based around likable characters that are from all walks of life, because it's supposed to show the unity of the galaxy and the unity of the world. That's where diversity makes sense. Because you had and I know people love to throw around diversity and representation these days in various meaning manners, but the reason why it was like that on Star Trek was because it was supposed to show that yes, we can all work together, we can all be together. No one person is better than any other one person in this room. Just because Captain Kirk was the captain didn't mean that he was necessarily the most important character. A lot of people loved Mr. Spock or Uhura or Scotty or Bones or Sulu or a bunch of people in there. I think that they should have given more character development to some of those characters in the long run, but I think maybe that was because season 3 got derailed a bit and they never had a season 4. But Star Trek works on a level where you need good science fiction writing first, and you need somebody who's also almost equally good at character development. That's why you need a good writer's room for it. But I don't think that Paramount is going to wind up doing that. I don't think that they're going to wind up doing that with the television series either. I think they're going to try and drum up nostalgia like they've been doing, and they're just going to keep pushing the calves into the meat grinder. And it's not going to end until these things literally start hemorrhaging and losing huge amounts of money for Paramount, which I think is an asinine decision by them. But in saying that, neither of these projects, the Noah Hawley Star Trek 4 or the Robert Sallin pitch for a new Star Trek film, neither of these have been confirmed. Well, neither of them have gotten off the ground because Noah Hawley's is basically stuck in development hell, and it probably will be for ever. And the Robert Sallin pitch is probably, it might get heard and rejected. We don't know what's going to go on with that. We don't even know what the pitch is because he hasn't he doesn't want to release it to the public obviously before he pitches it to the studio. So there's no guarantee we're even going to get anything after this period, at least in the next period of years. Maybe Paramount will take the hint and stop producing Star Trek content for a while until until it kind of resets and people can go back and look at it again. But I want to know what you think. Do you think that Star Trek is a franchise that we should carry on immediately? We can still make good Star Trek, or do you think that it's something that maybe should just get left alone until the right people come along to pick it up again? And as usual, put your comments below. I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?